Hello, everyone, to the next session. We have a very interesting panel. I'm really looking forward to this. It will be moderated by Will Rivera about fighting back online misogyny, misogynoir, and harm reduction tactics. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you, as really important experiences and what we all need to know about. So thank you, and I'll pass to you, Will.
Yeah, hi everyone. First, thank you, Angeline, and to everyone at the Shield Conference organization team for inviting us and allowing us this platform to really speak about, fighting back and the harms that are being done to women, and particularly Black women and non-binary femmes who are targeted by this abuse and online abuse. And so, thank you all for spending the next, 50 minutes with us. And so we're just going to start out with introducing the panel. Dr. K, if you would like to start.
Hi, my name is Dr. K. I am a scholar, activist, and storyteller based in Virginia, and I have been studying online gender-based violence for over a decade now. And I am also a professor that teaches about it as well at several universities.
Next, Alexandria.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandria Noah. I'm a PhD candidate in developmental psychology at Suffolk University, right in the city of Boston. And I do a lot of work with young people, particularly Black girls, in the youth development space and working with caregivers and families about these topics as well. So, really excited to be here.
Thanks. Norma.
My name is Norma Buster. I'm Chief of Staff at CA Goldberg, a victims' rights law firm in Brooklyn, New York. I am a survivor of stalking and image based sexual abuse, and I'm the creator and host of Oral Arguments, a podcast about sex, tech, and victims' rights, and I am an adult content creator.
Thanks. Susanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susanna Gibson. I am a survivor of image based sexual abuse, a nurse practitioner, a mother, and the founder of My Own Image, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating tech facilitated gender based violence, image based sexual abuse, really through state level policy changes, media education, and community outreach and education.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Will Rivera. I am the managing director at My Own Image that Susanna just shared. Longtime advocate within the gender violence survivor justice field, and really great to have us all here. Thank you all. So, Dr. K, we're going to start out with you. Also, please, for logistics, if anyone have questions, answers, feel free to throw it in the chat, and then we will also give about 10 minutes after our panel discussion for those Q&A. So, Dr. K, can you level set and define both misogyny and misogynoir for the attendees? Can you speak to the reasoning for the distinction between the two and its impact on the online experiences of women and girls?
Yeah, sure. So, misogyny, as most of us know it, is the ideology and hatred of women because of their gender. And misogynoir is the anti-Black racism and sexism that Black women experience because of their race and gender. And it's not just for Black cis women. This also includes non-binary folks, agender folks, and gender expansive people as well. It is a term that was coined by Dr. Moya Bailey, who's a Black feminist, in 2008. And the reason why she created this term is because, as we all know about intersectionality, Black women tend to experience the world very differently from other women who are non-Black, and they experience higher levels of violence, especially in online spaces. It's really important to be able to have a distinction between the two because that really helps us with like the data, right? So when we think about organizations in like the UK, like Glitch UK, they have a digital misogynoir report where they actually looked at how much violence Black women experienced online, and they experienced it 40% more than their white counterparts. So it's really important to have that distinction. Lastly, it has a big impact on online experiences because the way that Black women are treated in society offline now translates and materializes to how they're treated online, right? And this can be very impactful to not only Black women, but also girls of all racial backgrounds, right? So if you see someone constantly being harassed online that looks like you or someone that you admire, you may have a fear that you could be next when it comes to experiencing online gender-based violence.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I wish we had almost 2 hours to go into that in detail. Thank you. Alexandria, how has, misogynoir, impacted Black women and girls' experiences online, preferably in our current political climate? Oof.
Yeah, thank you for so much for that question, and I was so engrossed with what Dr. Coghill had to say. So the first thing, so there's a few things. So first, cyberbullying and harassment. So Black women and girls often face racially charged and sexually explicit harassment. So this can include racial slurs. This can include hypersexualized messages and threats of violence. So the harassment frequently comes from it could be strangers, but also there's a lot of research about cultural betrayal. So this is this idea that folks that are within the same community are causing harm to one another. So, and that is kind of represented in what we see in terms of Black femicide, right? Of who are the perpetrators. So, just something for folks to think about as well. And then stereotypes and dehumanization. So Black women are often reduced to harmful stereotypes, for example, like the angry Black woman, right? That is reproduced by mass media, our favorite directors and, people like Tyler Perry, no shade, but, that they often reproduce, certain stereotypes about Black women that create this generalization, right? And these stereotypes can lead to consistent microaggressions and portrayals of Black women as either overly aggressive or sexually available, rather than Black women having their own agency, their own sexual agency. So the lack of nuanced, positive representations can make it difficult for young Black girls, particularly in the adolescent developmental period. It makes them harder to see themselves reflected in ways that are actually real for them, and it doesn't allow them to go through this process of self-definition, which is like defining things on your own term, like putting out your own self-concept, right? All of the things that are important to promote positive development for Black women and girls. And the other part is the sexualization and objectification. So Black women and girls often face an additional layer of sexual objectification. And I want to spend a little time just talking about Black girls because Black women and girls go through the same experiences, but developmentally, younger Black girls go through adultification. They face adultification, which is this idea that their girlhood is kind of stripped away from them, or people assume that they should be held responsible for certain things, which actually removes the responsibility from society to actually providing supports for young Black girls. So we often see misogynoir depicted like in human trafficking and Black girls going missing. And that is all related to the online experiences because these are pathways, right? So I see misogynoir in all of these intricate ways in terms of how perpetrators kind of use misogynoir to kind of get their needs met from younger Black girls, which is really horrifying. And then impact on mental health and child development as well. So I had conducted a research study on Black college women's experiences with white male supremacist ideologies and misogynoir. So I essentially was asking, what are your experiences with misogynoir on your college campus? And one of the things that a lot of Black college women were saying was they experienced far right ideologies on campus and online. So similar to Dr. Coghill's point of that, these online experiences have real material consequences for the in-person experience, right? And when you think about education, right, like that's where everyone's political views are strengthened or changed, right? So it becomes like a really important context to examine in terms of misogynoir and our political climate. And extending this point regarding our political climate, our recent election is actually a really good example of the intersections between misogynoir and fascism, the things that we've witnessed online. Kamala Harris, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, all have faced misogynoir and their identities questioned, which is a really like defining tactic of the far right. Um, and so what I propose really is this idea of far right misogynoir. So not deviating from Dr. Moya Bailey's point about misogynoir, but I also think it's important to look at the ways far right individuals, white male supremacist groups are using misogynoir in very different ways that are kind of being manifested in podcasts, red pill, all of these little subgroups. And I could talk more about like the Manosphere and all of that, but I'll just leave it at that just in case we have questions or but essentially in terms of the impacts, mental health, dehumanization, cyberbullying, all of these things.
Alexandria, thank you so much. That was amazing. Two side tips, everyone. We are available to talk about this further as well. So please hit us up. And also, all those in attendance in our panel, we all will agree that we need to protect our Black women and girls, period, both online and the physical spaces. So we all appreciate your support in doing that. Susanna, as an amazing and fierce survivor advocate and leader, what can be done to better support and prevent misogyny from happening in online spaces?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I have a lot to say about this, but I tried to whittle it down to just a few things. I think everyone knows that I'm very passionate about state policy changes. So, right now, there is no federal law criminalizing the non consensual distribution of intimate images. And or NDII. NDII and what we say IBSA, image-based sexual abuse, is a tool that is being used to target and harm women, particularly women of color and LGBTQ plus individuals, and is having a significant impact, especially on the younger generations. So what we need are state policy level changes. So we need uniform enforceable laws in states that criminalize what we say IBSA and NDII. We need stronger enforcement mechanisms to ensure that law enforcement and courts treat IBSA as a serious crime of sexual violence. Because we know that when clear laws exist, survivors don't have to beg for justice. I think one of the things that I've been watching and am the most concerned about, I've been watching for about a year or so, is the way that the media, policymakers, and our culture kind of selectively decides which victims deserve protections when we're discussing this particular issue. There's this growing focus on what we say digitally forged intimate images, aka sexually explicit deep fakes, which are absolutely a serious violation. But what's happening in parallel is I'm watching this kind of erasure of victims whose authentic images were shared without consent. And it's creating this good victim versus bad victim dichotomy, which is incredibly dangerous. It is kind of reinforcing purity politics as if someone who took a private image consensually is somehow less deserving of protection than someone whose likeness was faked. It is allowing lawmakers and the media in particular to selectively monetize outrage. And we know that all survivors deserve equal recognition and protection. It's all abuse, it's all a violation of privacy and dignity. And to that end, we also really need media accountability. Um, I think the media's reckless reporting, which tends to legitimize, amplifies, and profit from the harm and violence towards women, is kind of amplifying this dichotomy. And you can look at my own particular case as an example. They could have framed my story and if they chose to write about it, they could have framed it in a way that recognized it for sexual violence and a criminal act, but instead chose to highlight the fact that I am a mother in their opening of their story, the Washington Post did. Um, Making sure that everyone knows, because God forbid women are sexual beings and there's a sexually explicit image of a woman, a mother online. But they also chose to kind of draw and create a roadmap that allowed for mass distribution of these images. Um, all the while reinforcing this harmful stigma. And I think it was Dr. K who said, you know, young girls and women were watching what happened to me, and what is that teaching? What was the media teaching? The media was teaching these young women in particular, hey, don't stand out, don't raise your voice, don't, try to climb in terms of your career or education, or else we will tear you down and put you back in your place. And I think we need to kind of start holding the media accountable and having ethical standards for reporting on image-based sexual abuse, recognizing it as sexual violence, not scandals. And we also need bystanders to help us and speak out when they do see this in the media and in online spaces and say, hey, this is not okay. This is sexual violence. This is misogyny in action. And every voice that speaks out against misogyny online makes it harder for that misogyny to thrive.
So, Susanna, thank you so much for that. For everyone watching, my own image, we are pending state level policies, several bills in several states. So, really looking forward to the hard work on that. That's all being done unfunded as well. And also, I want everyone to know that it's just so amazing for every panel or all of our panelists to hear and know them personally that they will not stand for online abuse or keeping their experiences quiet or toned down. And they're all fierce advocates as well. So it's just great to be on a panel with all. Norma, from both a survivor advocate and victims' rights law firm perspective, what isn't illegal online but should be because of its direct impact on women and girls? How can lawyers and legal scholars better support survivors of online harassment due to misogyny?
Thank you for the question, and also to my co-panelists for everything you've all said so beautifully, and I just want to build off of it. I know Susanna talked about the fact that there's no federal law criminalizing image-based sexual abuse, and so that's one factor. On a state level, we've come a long way. When it happened to me 10 years ago, I lived in New Jersey, which was one of 3 states that had a law criminalizing the distribution of intimate images. And now I think we're at 49 states plus DC. Um, so we've come a long way there, but protections are still lacking. There are some issues with a lot of the state laws, which, um, my own is doing a lot of work to try to improve and fill those gaps. For example, many laws have a clause on proving an intent to cause harm. So a victim has to prove that the person who distributed their intimate content intended to prove harm. This is a barrier for victims getting access. Another thing is that many of these laws do not protect online sex workers whose content gets distributed. So, for myself, as an example, as an adult content creator, I have my intimate contents behind a paywall. And when that gets distributed beyond the paywall, that is a form of image based sexual abuse. And currently, sex workers don't have protections in most states. So there's a lot that we could be doing to improve these laws. But I will say that with criminal laws, the criminal justice system often fails victims. It's not built for victims. So it's not necessarily something that like we rely on or necessarily believe that we should rely on. Our firm advocates a lot for civil liability, and we believe in protest through litigation. So I want to talk a little bit about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because really what should be illegal is the way that tech companies are able to use it as a get out of jail free card. Now, what Section 230 is, it's a section of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, which has been interpreted in court to give tech companies complete immunity from liability for any third party content. So anything that like any of us post on these sites or platforms, they're not liable for. But they've used that in court as a defense for any arguments against, against their products. So, with any other industry, as individuals, if you're harmed by a big company or a powerful company or individual, we have the ability to have our day in court and say, "You caused me this harm, and you need to pay." And you need to prove that, but and show that you have damages, and that the defendant was responsible in some way. Um, the tech industry gets out of that. They avoid that day in court by using Section 230 to dismiss all cases that victims bring against them. So our firm has brought many cases against tech companies. Um, we're really engaging in the footholds where Section 230 doesn't apply. So it's not about the content, it's about the conduct and the product design. We have product liability cases that have been dismissed because, for example, Grindr, the gay dating app, we have had several lawsuits against them that have been dismissed because they argued Section 230 defenses. And for the sake of time, I won't get into too much detail about those. But if you want more information, feel free to contact me or check out our firm's site, CA Goldberg Law. We had, but some of our cases have survived those motions to dismiss. For example, our case was responsible for the shutdown of Omegle, which was a chatting site that was matching um, pedophiles with children on video chats. And it led to our client at 11 years old being sex trafficked for years. We sued on product liability claims, and it survived the motion to dismiss. And our attorneys have really gotten creative in that sense of thinking about, like, how has this tech company recklessly created a dangerous product? So I think that's one thing, is that we need that ability to redistribute the wealth from the harm doer to the victim. Um, that's one change I want to see. The other, to answer the other part of the question about how lawyers and legal scholars can better support survivors of online harassment. Um, Part of the work that I do at our firm, I oversee the operations, marketing, and client relations and intake at our firm. So in my time here, it's been 7 years at this firm. I've met with thousands of victims of various forms of tech and sex facilitated violence. And a big part of what I do is asking questions. I have 1 hour conversations with potential clients where we get into a lot of detail about what they're going through. And I warn them that it's not necessarily going to be an easy conversation, but we'll try to make it as comfortable as possible. And I just ask a lot of questions. I don't assume that I know the answers. And I ask about the various ways that what they're going through is impacting them and what they're afraid could happen, and then what they want to happen at the end. Um, there are so many different ways often to handle a situation, but different people have different needs, and some survivors really need to protect their privacy at all costs. Some survivors really want to fight it publicly and make, a different kind of statement. Um, some survivors just need safety. And the circumstances that they have, the life that they live, their experience in the world, their perspective, is going to impact how they experience what they're going through. For example, um, person who is in a very religious community is going to experience image-based sexual abuse in a different way than somebody who's not. And that's not that one way is worse than the other, they're just different. And so really just asking questions and listening and being non-judgmental is super important.
Norma, thank you so much to the steadfast support that you do supporting victims and survivors of this harm, and to all the work that you and CA Goldberg are doing. I mean, so glad that someone's out there doing that work. And just, to piggyback off of that really quick, non-consensual sharing of images is sexual violence, period. Like, we need to call it what it is and not downplay it. And also, we need to look at ensuring that individuals who are harmed this way are able to access state level victim compensation and reimbursement as well, because the current languages in most states are not up to par to what's happening in this very technological capacities. So, we are all advocating for that as well. So, everyone, thank you so much. We're going to do just a question for everyone now. And so, Dr. K, I'll start out with you, and then we could just go in the same order. So, in a perfect world, what would online safety look like, and who should be leading the charge for these ideal changes?
Yeah, so I think that in a perfect world, Norma kind of touched on this, is I like to say the qualitative data behind online sexual violence. So having conversations with actual survivors of technology facilitated violence. And I think that in a perfect world, it would look like using that qualitative data and their experiences to create laws and policies that would actually protect them. I also think that as far as it pertains to who should be leading the charge, it should be the survivors. We should be following the survivors' lead of what they need, right? And not what we think they need. A lot of times, in the social justice movement spaces, a lot of organizers and activists and advocates will think that they need to be the leader. A lot of ego goes into it, and they think they have all the answers. But the answers actually come from the people who are experiencing it, right? So it's really important for these places, for this ideal world to be led, survivor led, right? We should have survivors on the forefront, helping us make the decisions, helping us to decide what works and what doesn't work. Also, in a perfect world, I'm an abolitionist, so I don't think the carceral system actually works. And we've seen time and time again that the carceral system does not actually help, survivors of this type of violence. And I think that we really need to rethink what justice looks like for survivors, right? Because people can be repeat offenders. You can send them to jail for 8 to 10 years and they come out and they offend again, right? Putting someone on a registry is not going to stop them from harming other people. We have to think of more creative ways that are not rooted in like a carceral system in order to really establish justice. So that's how it would look like to me in a perfect world. Um, but I would love to hear what everyone else thinks.
Thank you so much, Dr. K. Alexandria?
I'm like, do I have to go after that?
I know, right?
No, Dr. K, I love what you said. And I've been thinking to Susanna and Norma's point about policy changes as well. In my experience, when I've worked with elected officials, if it's not a priority, like for their term, they won't pay attention to it, which is really frustrating. So, one of the things that in a perfect world is that you don't necessarily always need data points to prove a point because we have real experiences. Sometimes the research I'm a researcher, but sometimes the research doesn't always capture all of the different nuanced experiences that Norma was listing out. So in a perfect world, I really would hope that elected officials, understand the research, but also understand that not everything is always captured and really looking at advocates and community organizers as well. I also think in a perfect world, in order to kind of dismantle digital misogynoir, misogyny, all of these things, is to kind of create a culture where we all have an understanding of why um, these ideologies have real material consequences. I think our society is often individualistic, and if it doesn't affect us, then we don't care. But if we actually think about collectivism or building towards collective futures, we can start to really reimagine what the online space can look like. So if we create a culture where we understand what misogynoir is, and we understand that children in particular are one of the most vulnerable populations, when we have that understanding, we can say, actually, no, you don't deserve to be on this platform because you are causing harm. And I think Susanna talked about the bystander approach as well. Like that also, we need to have a culture of what is right and what is wrong. There is like there's no neutrality, right? And I think that's really important. The last thing is survivors being at the front lines, but also because I work with a lot of young people, adolescents have a lot of really great ideas and they also are very much impacted as well. So I think including young people in community organizing efforts around these issues really sets up the next generation, right? So those are some of my thoughts for sure.
Thank you so much. Although all those listening into our panel, for the lawmakers that don't listen, it's important that us as a collective, our voices are way much louder together than individualized in an organization or one person. And it's important to bring all of those voices together. Now more than ever, we need to practice our democratic rights, at least here in the U.S. But I wish all throughout our world can do the same to really uphold and lift up these voices and make everyone listen and let them know that we are demanding change. Susanna?
Yeah, I was going to talk about bystander involvement and this cultural shift, really, where we kind of push for abuse not to be tolerated. But since we're going on the policy track, I want to just piggyback on that for one last time. So one of the things our organization did is we created model policy for states on NDII, and we did that in conjunction with criminal justice reform policy experts and advocates, two in particular who are on our board, one of which was sentenced to 30 years in prison for a nonviolent offense and was pardoned back in 2020 after serving 16 of those 30 years. And normally works, he's not necessarily an abolitionist, but really does work to prevent and reduce incarceration, especially for nonviolent crimes. And um, we got to know each other when I was running for office, and then even more so post my election, and kind of listening to and seeing firsthand all of the violence that came my way and continued to. And we worked together to create this policy that really takes a nuanced and stepwise approach so that we're able to hold people accountable for sexual violence, which this is, but we're not unfairly, unjustly, or too harshly penalizing people that don't deserve to have misdemeanors or felonies. And so, really tried to involve the criminal justice reform advocates and take the voices and experiences of all stakeholders involved when we were creating this policy. Um, which I think really sets us apart from a lot of other organizations and carceral approaches. We also do have a model civil policy in place as well, and have worked with some of the organizations nationwide that are not in support of carceral penalties. But so I think stronger state policies. In a perfect world, tech companies would hire more in-person, like human content moderators, take a stronger approach to content moderation, pulling abusive material offline, actually listening to victims when we report, hey, this is non-consensual, or hey, this is abusive, and doing something about it. To Norma's point, they don't have to because of Section 230, but in a perfect world, we would have better content moderators, but also really focus on this cultural shift that understands that this is violence and online harm, and violence has very real offline and in-person harm. Understanding that 60% of victims of NDII are stalked online, but 40% are stalked offline in person. And 50% of victims contemplate suicide. So, again, online harm and violence has very real offline harm in person.
Awesome, thank you. And to go again on the tech companies and policy, I do want to highlight in January, Alexios has shared a brilliant researcher out of Cornell shared a investigative article he did that showed 90% of the traffic to a specific website directly came from Facebook ads. And so we really need to look at these tech companies, social media companies, not allowing this content to get on these platforms from the beginning, from the jump, right? Like, so that we don't have to sit here and do that. That is our goal. So we can try to do that. That would be, if we had everything that we could do in the world that would work out well, that would be it. So thank you, Susanna. Norma?
Well, I think in a perfect world, there would be no digital violence, right? But what I would like to see happen is victims having the ability to have their day in court against tech companies that cause them harm. Um, that's one thing. But the other thing is, so far, big tech, for the most part, has been created and pushed and amplified and legislated by white men, and that's not working. Um, uh, so there's been such an attack on DEI lately, but this is why it's important. We need different perspectives. We need funding for, the tech startups that are created by people of color, by LGBTQ people, by sex workers. Um, I really think that when we listen to and amplify the voices of those who are for the most part ignored, we all are safer. And so we really need to start there. One thing that I think about with this that I'm really passionate about is that as we protect children, that we are not accidentally throwing some adults under the bus in our actions. So there is a lot of push to restrict or really shut down the porn industry, and restrict access, a lot of blame on the entire industry for sexual violence, rather than the lack of porn literacy and sex education and all of the other factors involved. And in particular, with image based sexual abuse, it's been mainstream tech companies that have been some of the worst actors. Um, and so I think of porn companies as any other tech companies, and I think we should just treat them all the same, accountability for all of them. But when we blame issues like image-based sexual abuse on porn, we're also then excluding the adult creators who suffer from image-based sexual abuse. And so I think it's just, listening to those voices that people often, when I talk about like sex workers experiencing image-based sexual abuse, like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And so there is like an educational piece to it. And I think that, on top of the legislative things that need to happen, there's a cultural shift and that needs to happen where we need to start censoring consent, baseline consent in every moment for every person. And, one person's consent doesn't mean less than another's.
Norma, thank you so much. I don't know about everyone else, but I am energized and ready to go advocate after this panel. So I hope I'm sure our those in attendance watching us today feel the same way. So we're gonna go through some very quick questions. I don't believe we have much time, but Alexandria, I'm gonna send this one to you if that's okay. So what impact does Black Manosphere, and then there's like a little
Yep.
parentheses, which echoes white supremacist male supremacy, impacts Black women when the messages come from our own? How do these attitudes impact our safety with our brothers being radicalized in these ideologies? And how can we as a community address it?
Yes, I get this question a lot, especially working with teachers and just youth facilitators. So, for those that don't know, so the Manosphere is like a collection of blogs, forums, podcasts. We're seeing a right, everybody got a microphone now, right? So, we got the podcast, we got everything. And it basically is a space where men in particular can, um, perpetuate misogyny. And it's you at first glance, it looks like a space where men can talk about their grievances, about their own experiences, but it's kind of coded with like sports and finances, but underneath it, there is a lot of messages around a woman's value. And if we think about the Black manosphere in particular, so the Black manosphere, there's the manosphere, but there's a subgroup where men of color, and it's not just the Black Manosphere, there's other racial groups that have their own subgroups, but these are basically incels, which are in short, involuntary celibates. These are men that blame society and blame women for their lack of developing genuine romantic relationships. And with the Black Manosphere in particular, it is rooted in misogynoir and rooted in a lot of the Black angry woman stereotypes. And what people don't really understand about the manosphere, in particular Black manosphere, is that it is connected to Danielle's point, white male supremacist ideologies, right? And kind of this erasure of Black women. And that is also a defining feature of fascism, right? This idea of ethnic cleansing. And we're seeing that today in our political climate, right? So I could go on a whole nother tangent, but that is really what the manosphere is. And I say, as a developmental scientist, I always say that men of color, especially our young boys of color, they deserve spaces where they can talk about their experiences. We all have experiences. However, a lot of these incel groups play on the um, kind of the adolescent like nature of wanting a sense of belonging. So instead, they are saying, "Hey, you can kind of join our group and like join our group, and it gives a false sense of brotherhood, or it gives a false sense of community when again, they deserve these spaces but not at the expense of others who are victims and who are harmed, right?" So I try to make that very clear when talking about this issue. When it comes to how to address the Black manosphere, I always think about counter recruitment. So, instead of kind of adhering to like logics and all of these things, how about we create spaces for men of color, or young boys of color, particularly in this case, Black boys? How about we create organizations and movements so that they also feel like they're being heard, but also why don't we move them away from this male supremacist content and more towards feminist organizing, right? Because in psychology research has shown that when young people um are involved in community organizing, grassroots organizing, all of these things, it develops critical consciousness, right? This awareness of the systems of oppression. So I think that's one way to address it, but I also think that parents and caregivers, they just need to be aware of um the things that are happening online. Like I've come across a lot of families that are saying like my son is like into this, into that, and I'm like, "Have you had conversations explicitly?" And they're like, "I don't know how to." So I think the digital media literacy is important. Um so those are some of my thoughts on how to address it. And to answer Danielle's other question about the impact, there is that cultural betrayal. So cultural betrayal is this idea that, members of a particular marginalized group feels betrayed by other members in that group. And this often leads to poor mental health outcomes like PTSD. So that is a really it it it's a really important, topic to discuss, cultural betrayal. I think these conversations, especially as a Black woman, it is really difficult to have because at the same time, there are real consequences for the Black manosphere, but also how do we not demonize Black men as well? And I think these are just really hard conversations to have, but we do need to address it because, um, there are so many podcasts now that are perpetuating these ideologies, and our young boys are, like, internalizing it. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. For everyone listening, if you have connections with donors, foundations, just know that there is zero or little to none funding for education in these specific areas for outreach, awareness, and response to these harms that are being done. And as we see everything's being cut, but we also see the mass increases since the election was announced of the harms being done, particularly to Black women and girls. And so Today, we heard so many amazing initiatives and ideas. So please just fund us and reach out to those who are interested. I don't know if we have how much time we have, but there is another
We have a little
question.
buffer, so you
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead, answer the question, it's okay.
Okay.
What
All right. So I'm gonna just put it out there, and then whoever would like it, because it's like a really good one. As a college student, I have noticed harmful narratives about women, both sexual and misogynistic, celebrated by my peers, especially on platforms like Instagram and X. How should women my age, 18 to 24, navigate safety? When does a joke become a threat or concern? And standing up against these misogynistic jokes, content without feeling like the odd one out or stuck in the mud.
I can definitely answer that because this is one of my students.
Oh, go ahead. Extra
Yes,
credit.
yes, extra credit. This is one of my students. So, what I will say is that to answer the first question about how should women my age navigate safety and when does a joke become a threat or concern, the joke becomes a threat or concern the moment it's posted, right? We don't wait for it to escalate. If someone is saying something that is misogynoristic or misogynistic, the moment that it's posted, it's a threat or concern, and it should automatically be a red flag, and your alarm should go off. And pertain to, how to stand up without being the odd one out or stick in the mud, unfortunately, when it comes to being an advocate and it comes to really speaking up for things that you're passionate about, you will be the odd one out. There's no way around it. Um, one thing I stress to a lot of folks is that you have to be uncomfortable with you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you also have to be scared but do it anyway, right? So um it may feel like people are like, oh, they're a killjoy, they don't want to have any fun, but those are not the people that you want to be around because they're not thinking about humanity in the way that you are. And I know, like, right now between the ages of 18 and 24, it can seem scary because you don't want to be isolated from your peers. But trust and believe, when you hit your 30s and your 40s and you get older, you're gonna only wanna be around people who believe in the same things that you believe in, and you're not gonna want to hang around people who make jokes that harm other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
Can
Is there?
I can I
Oh,
ask?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought that was such a great answer, and also I just love this question, because it's so it's so real, and I've been in that situation so many times over the past 10 years. And yeah, like, people might not like you, and that's okay, and, with time, people will see a person who's standing up for what's right, and they will gravitate towards that. The right people will. But also, I have so many different friend groups, and I'm in my New York City bubble most of the time, but then sometimes I'm in my other friend groups where, like, they're not necessarily, like, as up to date, or I don't know what the right word is, but, like, they'll make, like, messed up jokes sometimes, and I'll just ask, like, "Why is that funny?" Like, asking questions, like, make them say it, because once they actually have to say it out loud, maybe nobody has ever questioned them on it, unfortunately, especially when you're, like, in your early 20s. And it has created it's, like, led to some interesting discussions, and I think, like, you're not always gonna, like, change someone's mind or the way that they speak in that one conversation, but you might plant a seed. And I think that's important if you're able to, and if you have the, if you have it in you, like, the energy in you to do that, then I think that can help move the needle with, like, the cultural shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, always make sure you're safe, immediately. Every survivor's journey is different. We are out there to support you. Each person here on this panel, I know for sure, will always be available. And just to know out there, it is very difficult to speak up. I mean, just us announcing this panel, we received threats that this was going to be, receive comments or trolled, or individuals are going to sign up on it. As Dr. K said, the moment that is shared, posted, that is a threat and that is harm. and we need to normalize that and call it out as a collective. So everyone, thank you so much. This panel was absolutely amazing and beautiful. Thank you all again. Thank you to SHIELD Conference for holding this amazing 2-day conference and having us here. It was great having this discussion. Take care.
I want to also thank you personally. What a powerful, powerful panel. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care, everyone.